Hello and welcome back to Live from Nowhere, your podcast for all things Marvel and cinema. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are on our fourth installment in the MCU. We are traveling to the realm of the gods. We are visiting our favorite Asgardian, and that is Thor. So just to give some context for the fourth installment in the MCU, Thor was released May 6, 2011. The film grossed $449 million worldwide and holds a 77% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The film was directed by Kenneth Branagh, and the notable stars in the film are obviously Chris Hemsworth as Thor, Natalie Portman as Jane Foster, Tom Hiddleston as Loki, and Anthony Hopkins as Odin. The film expanded on the MCU's cosmic scope quite a bit, and although it feels a lot different from the other three, it really started to expand into the Asgardian world and other worlds that are off planet from Earth. So with that, Joe, what do you think about Thor? What are your initial memories and just overall feelings on the movie?
Yeah, so I would say that this was the first MCU movie that I remember the continuity for. Of course they all had it, but I was just, again, very young, so I didn't remember much. This is the first one that I really remember, a lot of the movie for, and I think maybe that contributed heavily to why, like I said last time, Thor and this movie are my favorite of the original Avengers, the favorite of Phase 1, and so I have a lot of fond memories of this film, but also in thinking about just, everything that Thor is in this movie. I think he was an easy one for kids, if it makes sense. He's like a god, he has all these superpowers. He's like the first of the early MCU people that have these mystical superpowers. Because you have Hulk, who I think a lot of kids gravitate towards as well, just because it's big green guy that smashes things.
So jarring and different for kids,
But I think Thor was the one where he still looked human, where it was you could play as Thor and stuff. And so I have a lot of memories like that of playing as Thor, stuff like that, and that's always fun. And then I think it's just overall a really easy movie to digest, an easy movie to just get sucked into.
Yeah, and I totally agree. We are getting a little bit older with these films. We're now in 2011, so our memories, I would expect to get a little bit better on these films.
I'm a whole 10 now.
Yeah. I don't remember seeing this in the theater. I can't remember specifically. I might have. I just can't recall. I feel like the movie got lost on me early on. I can't remember anything from its initial viewing, but I knew of Thor, and I knew his powers and Asgardian, and as time moved on, he became more prevalent in my mind. And it got to a point in the MCU where I was I know who this character is, but I don't remember Thor or Thor the Dark World at all. And so I had to go back, and I'm I don't remember much of this ever happening. And so I don't know how I got lost along the way, but Thor definitely got ingrained on me as time went on. He like you said, he's very much our first sort of Superman for the MCU, where he's kind of a do-it-all. He's fast, he's strong, he can fly. He can kind of do a little bit of everything. He has an awesome weapon that he can use alongside his...
Great merchandising opportunity.
Yeah, fantastic. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about Thor. He's a really easy hero to like, I think.
Yeah. And so with that, we're just going to get into our usual ordeal. Ooh. So if you're new, we'll be going through each of Marvel's movies, each giving them a score in 10 different categories from a scale of 1 to 5, combining that to be out of 10. Each movie gets a score out of 100, and they try to achieve the illustrious Infinity tier, which is a 95 plus, which we haven't really had anybody come close yet, but we'll see. So before we get into our first category, let's get the intro. So our first category is casting. Do these actors do justice to their characters? Does the audience get lost in the performance and watch them fully become the character they portray? I gave this movie, maybe a little bit of a bias, a 5 out of 5.
Okay. This feels like your Incredible Hulk.
Yeah. So, starting off with, I think, the two, what you could argue are the main characters in Thor and Loki. Mm-hmm. You took two relative unknowns, just like you did with Robert Downey Jr. Obviously, Robert Downey Jr. is like a Nepo baby, and he had like legal issues.
Yeah.
But Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston, relatively at this point, are unknown actors. Mm-hmm. And they become like superstars. So I think that already is kicking off this entire movie in a great way. And I think Thor and Chris Hemsworth, it's hard to think about because he's like kind of arrogant in this like current iteration of him, but at the beginning I think you kind of forget how arrogant and how like stuck up and how much of like a just like an arrogance and a brat he was. And Loki's almost the opposite. He's like the voice of reason, which is really funny to think about in terms of his character arc throughout the rest of the MCU. Yeah. And so being able to play both of that from these actors who aren't really well known is a pretty big accomplishment, and a pretty big kudos to the casting department. Alternatively, I guess not alternative, but in addition, you have Anthony Hopkins, who is kind of the powerhouse actor of this movie. Mm-hmm. Really good actor. He played it really well, and I think that's where you can leave that. But then you have all of these side characters. You have Natalie Portman, who is like, again, I don't really remember her status at this time, but she, at least now, is a pretty big actress. Yeah. You also have like Dr. Selvig, you have Darcy, you have Lady
Idris Elba.
Idris Elba.
Even, although not as big in this movie, but yeah.
You have Idris Elba, you had Lady Sif in The Warriors 3. Mm-hmm. Like, you have all these auxiliary characters, all these secondary characters that also portray their characters really, really well. Yeah. And I mean, we have Coulson. We didn't really talk about it yet because, but Hawkeye, you have Jeremy Renner shows up.
Oh, yeah. I totally forgot.
So, you have another Avenger there. But also, people who don't really get a lot of props in this movie are the Frost Giants. I think, especially thinking about Laufey, he plays, I don't know who the actor is admittedly, but he plays that character really, really well. Yeah. And so, 5 out of 5 for me.
Okay, well, I'm going to match you early, and I'm also going to go 5 out of 5. When you think of the characters that come in here and how they stay in the rest of the MCU, I think that would naturally just bring it to a 4 out of 5 for me, and how big they get. Thor started off huge and stayed huge. Loki stayed relatively minor and kind of had like a slow burn until he became this roaring fire at the end, with like basically becoming synonymous with every other Avenger after the events of Loki and everything.
I mean, you have the Avengers movie. He's pretty big in the Avengers.
True. But I don't feel like people viewed him the same way as true. I feel like people like need him as like an integral part of the story going on. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe I didn't get that sense there, but it's like definitely by the end, it's like he's on the same level of any other main actor.
That's true.
In the MCU. But you talked about the risks again with, and I don't know how much. It is a risk because you're starting to establish this MCU. You're bringing in 2 more big characters are going to be in the MCU, and they're relatively unknown. And I do like how they balance that with pretty seasoned actors and actresses at that time. So you obviously have Anthony Hopkins coming in, who I think is fantastic as Odin. You talked about Natalie Portman, who was coming off. Well, it was quite a few years ago, but she was in the prequels for Star Wars, so she was a pretty big name at that time. I don't know about Idris Elba. I assume he was probably pretty big, even though his role wasn't that big in this film as opposed to other movies. But yeah, you talk about the rest of the auxiliary characters. I also think they're fantastic. I feel like I can't speak to how much okay, I'm thinking how easy would it be to go and grab another actor or actress and put them in that spot? Could they reproduce something similar? And I don't think so. I mean, Thor, you could probably say, oh yeah, just go get someone with long blonde hair and huge arms, and they can be Thor. But I feel like even if that was the case, he very much Chris Hemsworth became the character of Thor as time went on, and more so than just the, this dumb jock that you needed. Loki and Thor, I felt like were excellent, and this will probably come back into other parts of the categories, but I get major Scar Mufasa vibes from them, where Thor is kind of like the big brute, but maybe not the smartest in the room, or Loki is extremely cunning, manipulative, intelligent, and he's just like, you guys are really going to have this buffoon take over Asgard when I'm more, I'm more at the ready for the position. So that's kind of what I get. But yeah, just the characters that we get and how long they last throughout so many movies in the MCU, easy 5 out of 5 for me.
So that brings Thor up to a 10 out of 10, which makes it our leader in the category, and it can never be dethroned. So
only tied.
Yeah, so at the very least, it will be tied for first. Moving on to storytelling. Does this film tell a comprehensive story? Is it easy to follow, or will general audiences get confused by the story it is trying to tell? So, I gave it a 4.5. And it's maybe a little hypocritical of me. Because we talked about Iron Man and Hulk and Iron Man 2 being about oh, I want what you have stories. Which, to be honest, Thor is kind of the same general formula of
I get it, yeah.
You have power, I want your power, I'm going to manipulate you and undercut you so I can take over your empire. If you think about it, it's kind of the same thing in Iron Man where he's trying to get rid of Tony Stark so Obadiah can take over, But I like Thor. So I gave it a 4.5. But also I think there's a lot of different B-plots going on around here that I think elevated a little bit. You have the war with the Frost Giants, which a lot of those scenes are really, really good. And so you have that whole plot going on. You also have everything happening on Earth where it's you have the scientists with Natalie Portman and Dr. Selvig and all these people kind of trying to figure out what's really happening. And you have S.H.I.E.L.D. trying to figure out what's happening. You have all these other plots that I think kind of work in conjunction with the main overall plot, which is Loki trying to get rid of Thor. But I think that storytelling elevates it. But kind of character development, I do like how the characters change throughout the story and have all these kind of moments where they grow. I won't go into it too much, so I'll save it for the next category. But I think it did a good job of using both the A plot and the B plot to do that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna piggyback off what you were saying, and just throw in that we finally got a relatively non-linear story, and I'm so happy that we get to cover this finally because I feel like they had such great subplots. And you have the stuff that's going on in Asgard, and then you have the stuff that's going on Earth, and you have the two stories weaving around each other. And as far as storytelling goes, I really love Thor's story. I love the arrogant, childlike, bratty behavior. It's very much Tony Stark, arrogant, narcissistic, thinks the world revolves around him, sort of a thing, and has to learn, in this case, how to be worthy by the end of the story. But I also love Loki's story of, not feeling like Thor was always the brother that got all the attention, even though sometimes it wasn't always worthy. Like Loki felt like he never really fit in, and he finds out why. But I just love that dynamic between him and Thor and Odin. I think that's a fantastic story. We are starting to, like I said, get a little bit more complex with our stories and get a little bit deeper, which I really enjoy. So yeah, I love Loki searching for acceptance, and I love Thor looking for worth. Those two give me a 4 out of 5. 4.5 out of 5.
So with both of us giving a 4.5, it goes up to a 9 in storytelling, which is going to continue a trend of Thor is now our leader in that category.
Dang.
And on to character development. Do these characters grow throughout the story? Do the lessons these characters learn change them? So, I talked about this one a little bit already in my storytelling thing, but we have Thor who starts off very bratty, and by the end, obviously he has to re-earn this worthiness, and he does by being willing to sacrifice himself and doing not only the sacrifice of his body, but once he kind of survives that, then he sacrifices his love with Jane, or is willing to sacrifice his love with Jane, and so he goes from I'm gonna take what I want and do what I want, and I know what's best, to being really selfless over the course of a story, and it didn't necessarily feel rushed. On the other hand, you have Loki, who, if you know Loki, at the beginning it doesn't really feel genuine, where he's brother, please stop, please don't. It's always a little bit of manipulation happening.
You're just trying to get to the throne, that's obvious.
Yeah. But you still, if you don't have that background, he seems as someone who went from a caring brother to being betrayed by his family, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about, is imagine thinking your whole life that you are playing second fiddle to who you think is your blood brother. Turns out he's not, but not only that your dad didn't adopt you because he wanted to save you or because he loved you. He adopted you as a political pawn. And so he has this ultimate betrayal from his father that justifies and helps kind of push him towards that darker side. So that's another good development. And I think Odin has minor development of realizing he has done some wrong and stuff like that, but I would say Thor and Loki are the two main people that have character development, and they did that really well, which is why I gave it that 4.5.
Yeah, and so I think it's best to focus on Thor and Loki. You could probably, there's not a lot of I think all the auxiliary characters have a role in their storytelling, but I don't see much character development with all the other side characters. But what happens with Thor and Loki is excellent. I've talked about Iron Man, how I really love the arc of arrogant, narcissistic, to learning to have compassion or sacrifice or be worthy in some respect. And I love how he learns a lot of it from Jane, this regular, simple human from Thor's standpoint, that teaches him how to have compassion for others, which Thor didn't necessarily have at the time, and how to really just be a good person that thinks about other people. And I loved what you were talking about with Loki, because that's also what brought the category so high for me, is Loki's deep desire for acceptance. Like you said, he was looking for it his whole life, and only to find out does he really want it anymore? Because he finds out that these people didn't even adopt him for the right reasons. And maybe you can help remind me, but it's one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie, if not my favorite, and I can't believe I'm blanking on it, but it's the scene where
You know, it all makes sense now why you favored Thor all these years. Because no matter how much you claim to love me, you're gonna never have a frost giant sitting on the throne of Asgard.
Loki and Odin are talking, and they're getting really emotional, and Loki says something to Odin, like, I can't remember. Can you remember the scene?
Are you talking about the scene, like, when he first confronts him about
I think
it?
so. Do you remember what he says?
I don't remember exactly what he says, but he, like, is just yelling at him, saying that, like, he could have done the job, he was worthy, like, and stuff like that. And that's when Odin, like, goes into his Odin slump.
Yeah, he's like,
He
enough
just
of this.
He
I
said
shall
enough of
sleep.
this. I'm going to bed.
That honestly, looking back, I was like, this is hilarious. You are like the ruler of like the most powerful planet that we know of, and things are getting too tense, so you're gonna go to sleep. Like, and now Loki's just gonna take over, and Thor is on Earth trying to figure out who he really is. I found that hilarious.
Yeah.
Only to find out it's like he's like cocooning himself to recharge.
Yeah, he does that a lot apparently because he like when Laufey goes in, he's like, the rumor is that you can still hear me.
Yeah.
So that means like he does this enough where everybody else on other realms knows about it, and they also are like, there's like rumors and there's like myths and legends about like, oh yeah, when he sleeps he can still hear us, or like, so how often does Odin do this?
Yeah, and I'm like, what are you, Godzilla? Like, why are we charging? I don't know. I found that absolutely hilarious. But
yeah.
But yeah, maybe when you're talking next, I'm going to try to find that line, because I thought the acting between Anthony Hopkins and Tom Hiddleston, that was probably my favorite scene. I felt all of Loki's like outpouring, like you feel like he's just like this evil, manipulative, like Thor's like a golden retriever type brother, and you're just like evil and trying to get the throne from him. How dare you? And then that scene comes out, and it's like, I always say his name like this, but it's very Killmonger-esque. Like, it's like, maybe I can't agree with what you were doing, but I get how hurt you must feel.
I understand how you got there.
Yeah.
Maybe I personally wouldn't do this, but I understand why you're doing it and how you got there.
Exactly. And that's what makes a great villain for me, and we'll talk about the villain category specifically, but yeah, that's 4.5 out of 5 for the character development. Just excellent with Thor and Loki.
So that gives it another 9, which for the third category in a row makes Thor our leader in that category. On to action. Are there fight scenes that you will always remember? How are the powers of each character showcased? So I gave this category a 4.
Okay.
And so I really like the Frost Giant scene. I really think it displayed the arrogance of Thor's fighting style, where he's just like, okay, everyone is literally bum rushing him. Everyone else is on his team is retreating, and he's still fighting. But I also like the moment where he has his hammer and he's just like twirling it, and he's just throwing rocks at people.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you probably are the strongest one there, but you are fighting very arrogantly.
So I think that's a great scene, especially when he takes down like the frost dog. I don't know what it's actually called, but like the giant dog thing, which will come back later when he fights another dog. Kind of. It was mainly Hulk, but
oh yeah.
But also we have the scene where he doesn't have Mjolnir in both, when he's trying to get it initially and he just takes down all those shield agents, which isn't as impressive. But you have the I don't even know how to describe it. It's just like the sheer joy of like, okay, he's fighting the Destroyer without his hammer, without Mjolnir, and then he finally gets it back, and after he gets like whacked.
Yeah.
And then he gets it back, and I think that's like the early moment of it's when thinking about it in the early MCU, that's the same feeling as what a lot of people got when Captain America wielded Mjolnir. It's Mjolnir just has this aura and this joy that when you see somebody finally like get the hammer after such a long build-up. It's so satisfying.
Yeah.
So I think that was really great. And I mean, I would say that the Thor and Loki fight itself, like, it's not that great. Like, it's just kind of there. But a lot of the other action scenes make up for what's lacking there, because that's more of an emotional battle between Loki and Thor.
Yeah.
Where you have the Frost Giants and the Destroyer that serve as the physical battle, and so a 4 out of 5 for me.
Okay. I think we disagree. I think this is probably our biggest discrepancy so far. So I'm going to give it a 3.5, and I'll talk about what hurts it so far. And it's very similar to Iron Man, where the action scenes that are there are great, but they are kind of few and far between. Like, we have an initial huge battle, and then it's a lot of, like, Loki manipulating on Asgard, Thor doing soul-searching on Earth, and then you have the big battle with the Destroyer. And that's kind of it in my eyes. You do have the scene where Thor is basically like just taking out agents, even though he doesn't have the power of Thor anymore. He's still a very strong individual, which is great to watch, and just them realize, like, what's this dude on steroids or something? Like, how's he just like going through everybody? But yeah, so the scenes I'm specifically looking at for action is that battle on Jotunheim. Very much shows Thor's arrogance. I thought it felt very Game of Thrones like, in terms of, like, I guess it's like visuals, and they're kind of like fantasy type characters that are on the planet. But just seeing Thor use the hammer for the first time like that is just awesome. And I this will bleed into visuals a little bit, but just watching Mjolnir go to work and all the fun ways that Thor uses the hammer. I love, like, the creatures they use in it. I love how confident Thor is, but it's like, okay, like, you're doing fine, but you don't get too caught up or you're going to get captured and be in real trouble, you know? And then there's the battle with the Destroyer, and like you talked about, Thor getting the hammer and then just, you know, going to work on the Destroyer. And then, yeah, I find the scene where he's just, like, going through all the agents great, because it showcases that he's still very strong even without the powers of Thor. And really the only thing that stops him is he's just, like, in, like, so much grief from losing his powers that he's just kind of like, oh, just take me, you know, sort of a thing. So, yeah, they're kind of few and far between, but the ones that are there are pretty fun to watch.
So that brings action to a 7.5, which makes it our second in this category, still trailing Hulk.
Woo!
So Hulk is holding strong. On to the villain. How memorable is the villain? How much sense do their motives and actions make? We talked about this a little bit already. So we have Loki as our main villain. I gave it a 4 out of 5.
Okay.
So the motives of Loki, I think we both agree, easy to make sense. We talked about it. He got betrayed by his family at, like, the worst level. I don't really know if there's anything else more to say other than, like, Odin's a really bad dad, and this comes back time and time again. It's like, while Odin is super powerful and he's a legendary warrior and a legendary ruler, he is not a good dad.
For a while, yeah. It eventually does turn around?
Kind of. I mean, he at this point we don't know this, but, like, his daughter's locked in, like, hell, basically.
Yeah.
And then he more or less killed Loki's family and then kidnapped him.
Yeah.
And then Thor, he's like this tough love thing going on with him.
Yeah.
So not a great dad. So that's kind of where the villain thing comes in, because Loki has daddy issues. But also, the reason I give it a 4 instead of, like, a 4.5 or a 5 is just because of that, like, it's a psychological battle between Loki and Thor, and while I do enjoy that, because, you know, it's the same thing with, again, Killmonger, we're going to bring him up time and time again. He's kind of like him and Thanos are like the go-to villains in the MCU, so.
Yeah.
But I feel like his psychological battle wasn't, like, really done super intricately, and it wasn't really developed, because, like, you even have Thor literally say to him, like, I don't know what I did to you, brother.
Yeah.
So it's not like Thor's having this huge, like, psychological, like, breakdown or, like, dilemma because he's, like, Loki's kind of right, or, like, I have to change my ways. It's like, Loki's just lying to him. That's basically what it is. Loki's just lying to him. So there's not much going on there. Our secondary villains of, like, I guess you would say the Destroyer and the Frost Giants are both byproducts of Loki, so he still gets that muscle in there, which is good, and I think that speaks to his manipulation abilities, is where, like, he can get others to do the bidding for him, which boosted it a little bit, but a 4 out of 5 for me.
Okay. I'm not too far off. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Loki is far and away our best villain so far in the MCU. Out of the 4 films that we've covered so far. So, for how I rank these villains, is I see them 2 ways. You have Killmonger, who maxes out 5 out of 5 for me from a motivation sympathy standpoint. I want to root for you so bad, but I don't like the way you're going about it. And that Killmonger is like a 5 out of 5 there. And then there's the 5 out of 5 where it's like, you are a great villain because I don't know how my heroes are going to stop you. And I love that, like, unstoppable force aspect, and that is Thanos for me. 5 out of 5, maxing it out. And even it, like, I mean, it was a great, like, sympathetic argument that he had, which was like abundance of resources, not overpopulation. But there's a little bit there. But Thanos's was really like, I don't feel like anybody can stop him, and that is also makes a fantastic villain for me. So those 2 I kind of gauge this by. Loki, I feel like what makes him a great villain is that motivation of jealousy and inadequacy, and him just feeling so unloved all his life, and you can just feel that pain. So that probably would have made it like 4.5 probably for me. But the reason I brought it down to 3.5 is because of that, like, Thanos aspect. I don't feel like Loki is unbeatable. His powers are unique and fun to play with, but they're not, like, in a fight he wouldn't stand a chance against Thor. So, like, I need to feel like the villain can truly beat our hero, and I don't really feel like that. But I can just get behind his motivation here. So I think a 3.5 is a good spot for Loki.
So that'll bring villain to a 7.5, which, again, Thor is now our leader in that category. So didn't miss us being the leader for too long.
That was a low bar.
Yeah, just one category. Now, world building. How does this film expand the Marvel Universe? Does the audience come out of the film knowing more about the universe and its contents? We also got a comment about this on the last episode in saying that characters shouldn't be included. And I agree to some extent. Maybe I was relying too heavily on the characters, but it's hard to not include the characters when the Marvel Universe relies so heavily on the characters to, like, explain their universe. But in honor of that comment, I'm leaving the characters out of this. So Hawkeye being added as a new Avenger means nothing.
I don't even know if I included characters in my my discussion, and I did it by coincidence. I wasn't even thinking about that.
So I'm only including the expansion of the universe and the world in this. Spoiler alert, it's still a 5. So we leave Earth for the first time, which is huge. But not only do we do that, we learn that the Asgardians and these gods don't just exist. It's not like a random thing where okay, they've existed in this part of the universe and we've never seen them before, they've never interacted. They show us a scene very early on that shows that they have interacted with humans before. They saved humans before. So that's a huge kind of lore building thing. But you also have all the realms that really expanded upon what we knew of the Marvel Universe. Like, at this point, we only really knew that humans, like Tony Stark, with money, or like experiments like the Hulk existed. We got to the point now where we have gods and we are adding like mystical powers into it, and so I think that's a huge thing to expand the MCU. And that's why I think it has to be a 5 out of 5. It is the thing that has changed the world of the Marvel Universe the most so far.
Yeah, I was a bit too low, so I did bump mine up to a 4.5 out of 5. I'm nervous to max it out because I keep trying to gauge it based on like what others do. I'm hesitant because as I talk through this, I might change it to a 5 out of 5 because I don't know how many other movies truly create a world that is so different from Earth. Mm-hmm. And so I'm specifically looking at the Guardians movies, Doctor Strange, although it takes place on Earth.
It adds a magical
huge element.
Yeah.
And so, okay, maybe I will give it a tentative 5 right now. The only reason I wasn't doing it was because I was factoring in the amount of time. Even though we're introduced to Asgard, we spend a lot of time still back on Earth. But I don't think that's fair because I don't think the amount of time you spend on a planet should take away from what you're getting introduced to, which I think you were kind of talking about. We do very much get introduced to gods for the first time, and if you're humans or you're S.H.I.E.L.D., you're looking at Iron Man and you're saying, very explainable. Mm-hmm. Billionaire now has this very advanced suit. Okay, the Hulk, maybe not so much explainable, but still within the realm of like reason and logic.
Yeah.
Thor makes no sense to us. It makes no sense where his power is coming from. We have no idea how the Bifrost works, how Mjolnir can be unable to be picked up by anybody that isn't worthy. None of it makes sense. And the world of Asgard and all the other worlds that come with it is massive world building. It's the first time we get introduced to gods and the 9 realms, and they are a huge factor going forward. Even if the other planets aren't as big, there's like touches of them as we go through the MCU, but it's really Asgard, and Asgard is critical for its introductions of the Asgardians. And I could probably very easily move it to a 5 because I'm still going to include characters. We get new characters here that we stay with us for the rest of the MCU. I'm not weighing it heavily. But yeah, we get a lot of super integral characters for the MCU. But I will exclude that and specifically just look at what we're getting here with these off-world planets. And yeah, I'll go 5 out of 5.
So that gives it a 10 out of 10, which makes it our leader and will stay our leader just like our first category with casting. All it can do is somebody else can tie it now. On to visuals. How visually stunning is this movie? Does this movie have iconic shots that leave the audience in awe? So I gave this a 4.
Okay.
I think the main thing that influenced me to give it that score was Asgard itself. Asgard is phenomenal. It is beautiful, and it's just so amazing. And I'm I guess to include it in there is the Bifrost as well.
Oh yeah.
The Bifrost, they did a great job.
So cool.
And so everything about Asgard is so beautiful and royal, and in that, I think it's hard to not just like look at it in awe. And I think that's such an important part of the movie, because in order for Asgard to really feel like this place for gods, it has to do that. We couldn't, look at Asgard and think, oh, this could just be a random place on Earth.
Yeah.
Like, we need to feel like this is nothing that can ever exist in our planet, which it doesn't feel that way. And additionally, we also have the frost giants, because we talk about CGI in this.
Yeah.
I think the design of the frost giants is so amazing, but also their kingdom is really well done, and it's a great contrast to Asgard, where Asgard is like golden and bright. The frost giants are like, they crawl out of the shadows, and it's really dark, and it looks like a tundra. And so those two things already bring it up to me pretty significantly. But also you have the scene that's with Mjolnir and kind of everything that surrounds that, of like, if it's him, having the thunder come down on him, or if it's him just hitting rocks and hitting people with Mjolnir. There's a lot of visuals here that are really well done. And I think even just the whole like New Mexico scene of like the hammer stuck in the dirt is pretty iconic, and I think all of that combined is where it brings me to a 4.
Okay, I'm a little bit higher here, so I did a 4.5 out of 5. But I think I don't have much to say, because I think you took all the words out of my mouth. Asgard is breathtaking here. It looks incredible, and even though it does look very much like a huge palace, you have those effects of like it sitting on this like plane, and you have no idea how it's just sitting there, and then you have the water just falling off into who knows where, and it's just like this just looks so exotic and different, and I have no idea how this is working. And so Asgard looks amazing, Jotunheim looks amazing. I'll ignore Earth because there isn't much happening.
New Mexico doesn't look amazing to you?
No offense, but there's a reason that they picked New Mexico. They need Thor to go to like a relatively unknown place, or somewhere that like...
Hey, everyone in New Mexico is going to hate you after this.
Maybe. But they needed Thor to... They didn't want Thor to land in New York City. That's not what they needed for this story. I don't know why they chose New Mexico of all places, but there had to be a reason. So, and then I loved what you said about Mjolnir. I love all the times the camera follows Mjolnir as it's just plowing through people. And I didn't even think about this, but every time lightning is brought into it with Thor, I think those are fantastic shots. I'll also comment, because I think it's part of the visuals, is the costume design of a lot of the Asgardians is also amazing. I don't think it's their best like version, that for me personally, of all the Thor movies, but they are also great in it. So just really great shots, great cinematography. 4.5 out of 5.
So that brings visuals to an 8.5, which does make it our leader in this category once again.
Okay.
It's becoming a trend. On to soundtrack. Does the score of the movie help advance it? Has it left a lasting impression in your mind? So for me, this is the weakest category out of them all in this movie. I gave it a 3. And the reason I gave it just a 3 is because it doesn't have like those songs like you think of with AC/DC and Iron Man. So when a movie doesn't have stuff like that, it needs the score to really bring it up. And I think, again, Thor eventually has a score that I love in Thor Ragnarok. I think that score is amazing, but it's not present in this one. And so we're really relying heavily on kind of a score that is... It's not a bad score. It's just like, it's not memorable, and it's pretty average. And so that's where you would land it on an average score of about a 2.5. That's half, So that additional half-point bump comes from the sound effects. I love the sound of Mjolnir. And it's just, it's such an iconic sound effect. It's such an iconic sound that that bumps it up, and I think that's really where my score comes from. It's like, okay, the score of it isn't bad, so I can't like knock it. But so I put it at a 2.5 for an average, but then Mjolnir's so amazing that I just have to bump it a little bit more just for that.
Yeah, I don't know if I even have to say anything. I matched your score with a 3 out of 5, and it's basically for the same reasons. I will say this: upon rewatching certain scenes, I've noticed a lot of the score is very opera-like and gives it like an epic type of feel, I think, which I thought was really great, a really great effect for like the Asgardian people to have this kind of music associated.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah,
I think
I'm not
opera
saying
could be the music of the gods.
yeah, and I'm not saying that that's my personal favorite, but I thought it was a really great choice. But that's not the score, and the lack of a soundtrack is not what's doing it for me. And I honestly would have bottomed it out, but Mjolnir is carrying this category because, like the Infinity Gauntlet, you can whatever sound design they used, you get such a sense of its power and weight. And I love the way when Thor is either spinning it and the sound it makes, or when it's far away and Thor has to call it and you can just hear it like plowing through either structures or people on its way to Thor. It's such an iconic sound design. I'll say it again. Just love how you can hear its power in that hammer, and it's fantastic, and it's enough to honestly bring it from what probably would have been like a 1 or 1.5 all the way to a 3 for me.
So that brings soundtrack to a 6. So it just narrowly misses becoming our leader, actually. We talk about it as this is the weakest part of the movie, and it still almost becomes our leader.
Yeah, the soundtrack wasn't good in the other ones.
Yeah.
Another low bar.
So it does come in second, right behind Iron Man 2. And on to the post-credit scene. This has been a relatively easy category for most movies to score well in. How does the post-credit scene make you feel? Is it worth the wait, and how does it set up the future of the MCU? So I gave it a 4.5. It doesn't get that 5 out of 5 that Iron Man got with the Avengers. Because honestly, in rewatching the post-credit scene itself, it was like the main, I'd say, draw of it is the fact that Loki's alive. It's like, okay, I expected him to be dead, and now he's alive. So there's that mystique behind it.
First of many times for Loki.
But I only say that because I'm trying to imagine this as a viewer who knows very little. And so when you see the Tesseract, I think it could very easily be argued that this should be a 5 out of 5 because we see an Infinity Stone. But at this current moment, in thinking about the post-credit scene in isolation of itself, we don't necessarily know that it's an Infinity Stone. We know it's the Tesseract, we know it's some artifact, but it's a little bit of a wait until we officially know it's Infinity Stone. I have a hard time differentiating the two and not just giving it 5 out of 5 for the Infinity Stone.
Yeah.
But I use some self-control there. And I'm mainly scoring it because it's like, okay, what is Loki going to do now? He has control of Dr. Selvig. He's in S.H.I.E.L.D. There's this kind of deep state feel of it, which eventually we will get with Hydra and stuff. So there's just a lot of mystique of I really don't know what Loki's about to do, but I know he has a lot of control and a lot of power, and nobody knows he's there.
Yeah, and this was tough. I'm going to go 5 out of 5 because when I first went into it, I didn't think of it in a vacuum. I was thinking this is the first time that Infinity Stones are introduced. monumental for the Infinity Saga. So that's huge. And in the form of the Tesseract. And then you obviously have Loki coming back, which is the first of like, wait, you were supposed to be dead, sort of a thing. And yeah, him being undercover and nobody knowing, you have a sense of what Loki can do. You have a sense of how cunning and manipulative he can be. It's like, everyone could be in real trouble on Earth. And this is really a lead-in to the Avengers movie, which I felt like wanted to just bring it to a 5 out of 5 for me. The post-credit scenes have been so great because I'm looking at them retroactively. So I see I can see how much weight they are carrying on their shoulders. Mm-hmm. But it's a post-credit scene for the Avengers movie, which is my favorite in Phase 1. So I'm going to stick with 5 out of 5.
So that brings it to a 9.5 out of 10, which, as good of a score as that is still second place.
That Iron Man.
Behind that first Iron Man movie. I think you can kind of feel where Thor is going to end up now. I think if you're at this point, Thor is kind of killing the game.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
On to our final category, rewatchability. How likely are you to watch this movie again? Is it a movie you watch for continuity purposes, or will you put it on time and time again? So obviously this is my favorite character. However, I still didn't max it out. I gave it a 4. Because it still isn't my favorite Thor movie. That's Ragnarok. I think most people's favorite Thor movie is Ragnarok. Mm-hmm. But I really enjoy this movie. And it's kind of... I would say out of the Phase 1 movies we've listed so far, it could be argued that I think it's the one I might put on the most often. I would say there are points of it where I'm like, I don't know if I really want to watch this anymore. It gets slow at some point, so that's why it's still, if you remember from the first episode, it is still below Iron Man for me, even though I would probably put this on first. I think Iron Man holds its own throughout the entirety of the movie a little bit more in terms of rewatchability, because I think a lot of what pulls you into this movie is a little bit of the surprise of it, and like the betrayals and stuff, and so upon a rewatch it doesn't hit as well. But it's still a 4 out of 5 for me, and I just really enjoy the movie.
That's fair, and I'm not surprised with Thor being your favorite. I went 3.5. I've said this with all the others. It's not even close to one of my first picks. It is still a very fun film. I love watching Thor and Mjolnir every time they fight. There is some slow scenes like you talked about. I love the emotion brought out from Thor, Odin, and Loki. I really love watching those scenes. There's a number of really good bright spots, but the film isn't one of my favorite ones. It definitely is Iron Man might be my favorite of the ones we've seen so far, but this one, actually no. I think Hulk is. Hulk's probably my favorite of Phase 1. It's hard to say because looking back at them, they're really good films, but they have some aspects that, like for Iron Man, were really jarring and brought the score down, even though I liked the film itself a lot more. So this film is very fun. There's a lot of movies I would watch first. It's cool to see how Thor and Loki and some of these characters start off versus where they are now. But yeah, so 3 out of 5, that's kind of like my middling, I'll watch it, it's fun, but there's a lot more I'd rather see.
Okay, so you're going 3 out of 5.
3 out of 5, yeah.
Okay. So that brings it to a 7, which makes it tied for second place with the Hulk, and our first place is still Iron Man 1. But that means that we are all wrapped up. So with all of these categories in mind, Thor comes in at a pretty astounding 84.
Okay.
Which does make it our leading movie by quite a significant margin.
Quite a bit. How much?
9 points above Iron Man 1. Which also means that it is our first movie to reach Stark standard.
The irony of them landing where they are.
Which is kind of funny because where both Iron Man's landed is Midgard.
Yeah.
A term from Thor. So, that's where we are. We're kind of in the middle of that tier at an 84.
It's the third tier, right?
Yeah, so it's the third tier. And it's kind of a movie I think is firmly there. I think it's a pretty good early movie for the MCU. Mm-hmm. I definitely don't think it's in the top echelon of like Celestial or Infinity tier, so this feels pretty good to me.
Yeah. Before coming into this, I viewed Thor and those initial Iron Man films and Hulk all kind of the same. Like, they're pretty good, but they're nothing amazing so far. And so I thought Thor would be a little bit more towards where the other ones are and kind of get grouped towards them, but I was like, man, there's a lot of elements of this that are going to really push it through. So it's kind of like the opposite, where the other ones got worse scores, but I might have enjoyed those films more. Versus Thor, I don't enjoy them as much, but it scored a lot higher. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's... I would have to think more about what it says about, like, the scores versus, like, how I feel about the movie overall and, like, my feelings about it, since the scores are a bit more, like...
technical?
Yeah. But, I was a little surprised by how well it was doing. And I'm surprised by it not being higher, because I felt like I did a lot of, like, really high scores. So it'll be interesting to see how movies get to Celestial and Infinity.
Yeah, I think there's a very, very low, like, very small margin of error for movies. Yeah. If you want to get into these upper tiers, which may warrant a little bit of a retrospective and adjustment, but as of now, I think it's really going to be telling once we get to the Avengers movie and where that ends up.
Yeah, for Thor is good. I'm okay with where it ended up.
Yeah. So that'll do it for this movie and this episode. We have a new leader in a lot of categories. We have a new leader in our overall rankings of movies. So next time we will not be reviewing a movie.
Yes, we will not be.
Yeah, so we're going to have a little bit of a two-parter episode. It's going to be one episode, but the first 30 minutes of it, we will be here, and we are going to talk about our predictions for Deadpool and Wolverine.
So many possibilities.
And then we are going to cut the recording, go watch Deadpool and Wolverine, and then immediately come back here and talk about the movie and talk about what happened. So, kind of a very preliminary spoiler warning. Yeah. You can watch the first half of the episode, then we'll put a spoiler warning on it, and the second half will be heavy spoilers, so we're going to have to make sure to put a spoiler warning.
Yeah.
But, if you see Deadpool and Wolverine opening night, this will be the podcast to come talk about it. We'll see how wrong we are, and maybe what I think we're going to do is we're each going to have, we'll talk about a little bit more, maybe between 5 and 10 predictions that we can make.
Okay.
And we'll see who gets the most right.
Okay.
So we'll see 5 or 10, and we'll see who gets the most right, who predicts along the lines of what's going to happen. And maybe we'll have tiers of them. We'll have to figure it out. But Deadpool and Wolverine episode. And then after that, we'll have Comic-Con. So it's going to be 2 weeks before we get to our next movie. But after that, we will be back on our regularly scheduled programming. Yeah. Some bonus episodes coming up.
Yeah. And I mean, these 2 weeks with Comic-Con and Deadpool Wolverine are like peak Marvel news that will be coming out. This is Marvel's only movie this year, so we have to talk about it on this podcast. And then Comic-Con, Marvel is going to be announcing a ton of stuff that we're naturally just going to have to talk about, like our feelings and how these fit into various projects and whatnot. So it only makes sense. And then we will come back and we'll go to the 5th movie, which was going to be Captain America, the First Avenger.
Which has a very strong possibility of rivaling Thor. I think...
I love that movie, so...
I think it's going to have a chance. If I was a betting man, it's probably going to end up in Stark Standard.
Yeah, and then we go to the movie that will wrap up Phase 1 with the Avengers. So,
a lot to look forward to, but
Yes.
until then, we'll see you next time. Peace out.
thank you.